Hey everyone, this is Young Pulse. I'm here with the Game Dev TV Community Jam featuring another entry that I really liked. This one is called Escape Time. It's a 2D puzzle game like Lemmings, but with portals and monsters. It's made by a guy named Exquisite, like eggs. And as you can see here from this picture, that it is quite inspired by Portal. One thing to note is that this is the type of game that I really adore in jams, where they take one mechanic and then through the use of level design and additional characters, obstacles, enemies, they really push it to the max. This is a perfect example of a one mechanic game that's really stretched to the limit. Now, you can play it from the browser. He does have a WebGL build, and of course, I'm going to run it from the source as I am for all these entries. Now, when you're running from source, you want to go to the build settings, you want to look at the first scene, and then open it from that scene. Now, I opened it in the latest version of Unity. He didn't build it in the latest version of Unity, but I didn't have any upgrade or import errors. They're just like these warnings, and so you should be good to go if you are using 2019.3.15. So I'm going to go ahead and start it and then kind of give my feedback on the game, my thoughts on it, and then jump a little bit into the source. So first off, I love this parallax here. You can see that the mountains are actually moving. It's just moving at a slower pace than the foreground. The audio is good, the mood is good, the font is a good choice. Overall good production value. Now, the first level I actually have a lot of problems with. So starting off, the dude's walking and there's an enemy and I'm like, oh shit, like I need to figure out what I'm supposed to do. The problem is this UI here is a little bit misleading because this doesn't look clickable to me. This looks clickable. When I click it, nothing happens. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe if I click this, what do I do? But then by the time I click it, it's already too late. There's nothing I can do here with this portal thing to actually save him. And so I can't be the only one who plays this first level like 3 times trying to figure out what's going on. One way you could have solved this, make this more obvious that it's supposed to be clickable over this. Looks more clickable than this thing does. And so make the scroll look like something that you're supposed to click on. And then the second thing is give way more time before I see the first enemy. Have the first enemy appear over here or something, because by the time I figure out this interface, it's way too late. And so, this first level is just a source of frustration, like all around. And I'm really not sure what to do about it. Of course, I'm also not very good at these games, as you can see. I'm about to lose again. So I'm not going to keep playing this game and just losing. I'm just going to go ahead and say that it is somewhat frustrating to try to get the gist of the game in the first level. There is also a bug in the WebGL version. I don't know if it exists on the desktop version. If you click how to play and then hit escape, nothing happens. I guess you can hit the back button in this version, but in the WebGL build, I don't see this back button. I was actually trying to hit escape and it just kind of broke. So that's something to examine in your WebGL build. But enough of that, I'm going to dive into the source. So one thing about the source is that he is using the manager pattern. He's got button manager, camera manager, Civ manager. Well, most games have some sort of level loading thing, but for the most part, it's like the manager. And so the best way to describe the source is it's kind of like a mishmash. So if we're looking at source and it's all spaghetti code, like at least you know that you look at it and it's like, okay, well, it's all just kind of jumbled together and I've got to use this find usages thing to figure out what goes where, how many, what's calling what, in order to figure out a mechanic. What's a little bit misleading about this source code is it looks like it was either partially cleaned up or he started off with a modular architecture or a modular approach to how he's going to organize his scripts and then just decided for the sake of time or whatever that he's going to stop doing that. Because you see things like, okay, there's an attack script. That's great. I love this. There's a destroy script. Great modularization or like isolation of responsibilities here. But then there's things like Civi. And Civi just like what exactly is this class doing? You've got if it was called like Civilian FX or something, because I do see that it's the one that plays the death sound. Um, it's got the tombstone in it. It's got the stats, but you've also got like a Civ manager. So it's almost kind of like um, there's a lot of things going on here, especially when you have Civ movement. Like if you had everything in Civ movement in the Civi class, then maybe I would have been a little bit more okay. It's like, okay, so he's got this great separation of responsibilities, except for like his characters and enemies. His characters and enemies are all mega classes. But instead, it's like, okay, we've got a mega class that is kind of not a mega class because the movement is in its separate script. Um, and to be honest, I actually prefer this setup uh, more than pure spaghetti code because at least it's somewhat organized, but it is a little bit misleading when you first jump into it because it's inconsistent in that you've got these great scripts that are like single responsibility, and then you've got like Civi. And so just keep that in mind when you look at the source code. Um, Overall, there's nothing that stands out to me that's really particularly difficult. Again, I don't like find object of type. And as I mentioned in the other videos, I would rather have a compile time error than a runtime error. And so if you have a dependency on the Civ manager, I would actually just require it up here or put a field for it and then drag it in. So this way, if something gets broken, if you were to lose this reference, you don't have to run the game to find that error. Ideally, you want to minimize the number of runtime errors in general. And I know it may seem bad, especially if you haven't ever done dependency injection. I actually had a phase where I was thinking like, ideal code is one where you could just delete a script out of the project and everything would still work and run. But realistically, scripts should work with each other, and so you can't have this pure like code base that is where every script is completely independent. And because of that, like once you get into dependency injection and injection containers, then you start to realize like, oh, I want to see errors during compile time, and I want to have these dependencies actually, well, they're injected in dependency injection, but you want them to be somewhat connected in that way. Whereas using something like find object of type doesn't actually have a connection because the object may not exist in the scene and you won't catch it until uh, runtime. And you want to catch errors during compile time. Um, and so, again, I'm just not a big fan of find object of type in any sort of shape or form in a project. So that's my only beef here. But otherwise, the code is pretty easily readable. Some things are a little bit weird, I guess, in terms of like endurance. Endurance is not usually a verb, um, so you have to like read this code here to determine what exactly it's doing. Whereas other functions like fail, dead are a little bit more obvious. And so um, I would say in terms of the code base, like put a verb in here or like a noun. Um, or like I would say like a more descriptive noun, I should say. Like trying to figure out what endurance does is a little bit confusing just by the name. But otherwise, it definitely looks like code from someone that is on the way to being an intermediate developer or already is an intermediate developer, but due to the constraints of the jam, could not modularize the code base entirely. Maybe did some things for the sake of time, or possibly just someone that again is just on the way to being an intermediate or uh, eventually a developer that's going to move away from the manager pattern and into something more like an event-based architecture with scriptable objects or something else. But for the most part, this code is readable. You may have to jump around and figure out what exactly the responsibilities of some of these mega classes are and what some of these function names actually do or what they actually mean. But otherwise, it's a well-produced game. I love that it's a one mechanic game that really takes it all the way to the max, just with additional characters being introduced later on and the level design. And I'm really happy to see this type of game submitted to the jam. So well done.